Welcome to Who Runs This Park, a podcast where you are invited into the hearts and stories of those who have committed their careers to the protection and preservation of our great national parks. Who Runs This Park aims to be a catalyst for inspiration, highlighting all that goes into managing our national parks and building a sense of appreciation for the invaluable beauty, diversity, and history of our protected lands. Today we have Jim Ireland with us, Bryce Canyon National Park Superintendent. Bryce Canyon, located in southern Utah, is famous for its red rocks, pink cliffs, and endless vistas. Bryce Canyon is specifically famous for the largest concentration found anywhere on Earth of unique geological formations called hoodoos, which are tall, thin spires of rock. The park is also located between 8,000 and 9,000 feet of elevation, offering cooler temperatures even in the summer. Jim himself has been superintendent since April of 2021, but has been working in Utah, previously superintendent of Timpanogos Cave National Monument for over a decade. Some other fun facts include that he taught classes at the University of Utah, which we'll dive into in our discussion, and graduated from the University of Arizona. And my dad went there, so I was obligatorily raised a Wildcat fan. So go Wildcats. I'm excited to hear Jim's story and heart for the mission of the National Park Service. Jim, welcome to Who Runs This Park.
Thanks, Ned. It's great to be here.
Yeah, of course. Can you share a memorable experience you've had as Bryce Canyon Superintendent?
Oh, that's a great question, and it's harder to think of one than you might think. I have to say, my first thought was one of my first days being at Bryce. I deliberately woke up really early in the morning before the sun was up. It was completely dark, and I made my way out to the rim of the canyon, and I just sat and listened to the birds start to sing. And then the sun came up over the far horizon and it starts to wash over the hoodoos and the amphitheater of the canyon part of the park. It's still to this day probably one of the more memorable experiences I had. Although, on the other hand, I have to say, overseeing a naturalization ceremony for new citizens. We've done several of them since I've been at Bryce, but especially the first one I did. There's nothing more memorable, I don't think, for a superintendent than getting to welcome in a group of brand new American citizens, and they take their oath of citizenship, and you get to welcome them and do with this notion that they now share in the ownership and stewardship of these lands. That's also
Wow.
super memorable. Yeah.
A few superintendents have mentioned the naturalization ceremonies just in general. This might be a silly question, but do they have to happen at a national park? Or is that more of like a special location?
I think it's a special location. I think once we started doing them a few years ago, I did my first one when I was the acting superintendent at Fort McHenry near Washington, D.C. And that was incredibly special because we were there where we honored the Star Spangled Banner. We're actually
Oh,
sitting
cool.
near the ramparts. The flag waves over, right?
Oh,
But that
yeah.
was a few years ago. So they've been going on for a while. But I think as they've become more popular, I think the folks at U.S. Customs and Immigration have realized that parks are a great setting for these, and we partner with them all over the country now. So they're great. It's really fun.
Yeah, that's cool. Can you set the scene? I mean, you did a little bit with the hoodoos and the amphitheater, but for folks who maybe have not been to Bryce Canyon yet, myself actually included, my bucket list is ever growing and the parks that I want to go to. But could you just set the scene of maybe what a quote unquote perfect day at Bryce Canyon National Park would be for a visitor? And I know I go back and forth, just some context with this question, because I think each park deserves more than a day. But just kind of, what are the like main attractions?
Sure. Yeah, no, and I have to say, every day is a perfect day at Bryce Canyon.
Ah,
Just had to get that in before I have to talk to the folks at the local tourism council. But no,
ah.
every day is beautiful at Bryce Canyon, whether it's summertime at 8,000 feet, it's like 72 degrees and
Oh,
blue
so
skies,
nice.
or in the winter, it's deep snow and cross country skiing and that sort of thing. But honestly, you need at least a whole day, right? Because you need to do something similar to what I just talked about. You need to show up early in the morning for a perfect day, and you need to watch the sunrise. There's nothing better than
Yeah.
a sunrise over the canyon. I would say that, and of course, to make a perfect day, you really need to sort of plan ahead. And ideally, if you're in the peak of the summer season, you've parked outside the park and you've jumped on the park shuttle bus, because that way You don't have to worry about parking. You can jump on and jump off anywhere you want, but find some sort of a hike, find somewhere to walk. We have hike, this is a hiking sort of park. We have 78 miles of trails. So from
Wow.
easy, relatively flat trails to more challenging. So find somewhere to walk. And while you're out there, find somewhere to just sit and enjoy the quiet and the beauty. Try to attend a ranger program. We do a daily geology talk that's kind of a staple that's been going on here for years. We have great interpretive naturalists. So for a great day, they'll really help explain the story and tell the history of the place. But then at the end of the day, you need to either stick around long enough or maybe go out of the park, maybe find dinner, maybe come back after dark and walk out to the rim
Mm.
again. And this time for the amazing night skies, right? For the
Oh,
incredible dark skies, the Milky Way over the hoodoos is just an amazing experience. And so there's this common phrase, right? Half the park is after dark. That's We're not the only ones to
oh, I
say that,
haven't
but
heard
it's
that. That's cool.
yeah, half the park is after dark. So from sunrise to sunset, um, if there if hiking's not your thing, you can rent a bicycle, and we have a paved bicycle path through the main part of the
Oh,
park. We
really?
have a we
That's
have a
cool.
concession horseback ride operation, so you can if horseback riding is your thing, you can book a 2 or 3 hour horseback ride down through the hoodoos. But spend the whole day from sunrise to sunset. That would be a perfect day.
One anecdote I'll share of kind of my first night sky experience was in Big Bend. And
Mm.
essentially, I grew up in Austin and never camped. Granted, like, you can see the stars in Austin and, like, some friends have ranches, that's kind of like a big thing, and so I'd seen nice stars, but I, in college, went on this backpacking trip with our outdoors group, and I remember just the way you described the rim at Bryce Canyon made me think of Big Bend because there's this loop you can do, and we were at the top of the rim one of the nights, and we brought our sleeping pads out and just laid on the rim under the stars, and it overlooks this valley that it was really my first experience being somewhere at night where there were no lights anywhere, like as far as the eye could see. And it was amazing. So you're just reconfirming how important it is for people to experience that. And yeah, just me, I haven't thought of that memory in a long time. So thanks. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
That's cool. Stepping back in time, and then we'll jump back into Bryce Canyon and get into a little bit more of the nitty gritty of what it's like to manage and be superintendent of. I want to get a little bit more about what led you to where you are. So, can you share a little bit about what led you to work for the Park Service in the first place? And my guess is that your youth internship at Petrified Forest National Park had something to do with it.
Yeah, it had everything to do with it. You're right. It was circumstances. I grew up in a family that went. Our vacations were typically weekend camping trips. I grew up in Arizona, originally in Phoenix when I was very young. My father was a highway engineer for the Arizona Highway Department, and when I finished fifth grade or so, I was about 10 or 11. He was transferred to the district office in Holbrook, Arizona. So
Huh.
Holbrook's up in the northeastern corner of Arizona along Interstate 40 and about 25 miles from Petrified Forest National Park. So that's where I was. I went to middle school and high school in Holbrook. It's a small town. And my father had become friends with, through work and other things, he became friends with the superintendent of the Petrified Forest at the
Oh, that's
time.
so
And
cool.
yeah, one day they were having a conversation, and the superintendent asked my dad. He said, "So what is Jim doing these days? What does he do for fun? What does he do?" And my dad said something sort of like, "Oh, I don't know. He has an after-school job. I don't know what else he's doing." Superintendent said, "Well, I'm trying to create a program whereby we could attract local youth to explore employment opportunities at the park. I'd like to, get local folks more, give them more opportunities inside the park, and we want to test this out with some local students. Would he be interested in maybe an internship?" So, long story short, they created this internship program. So, my senior year of high school, I went to school in the morning, regular classes in the morning in
Yeah.
Holbrook. And then I drove out to the park every afternoon, and they created sort
Really?
of an internship opportunity for me. And the high school gave me credit for it. And I had a couple of months where I shadowed the superintendent. I went to meetings. I sat in his office. I did various tasks for him. I worked a couple of months with the resource management staff out in the field doing science projects and work that they would typically do. I got to ride along with the law enforcement rangers. I went out with the maintenance crew and helped fill potholes. And I did that for 9 months. And then
Yeah.
when that was done, the idea was to see if this would help them build a cadre of seasonal employees. So they hired me as a summer employee. As a I started out when if you've never gone to college, since I was just a high school graduate, I qualified for only for a GS1 park aide position. GS1 being the lowest grade, right, of federal employees. Not very many of us have been GS1. There are a
Yeah.
few. I know several of them, but there aren't very many of us who started as a GS1. But what I found out was the idea was to put me in the fee booth at the park there to be the one to collect the money and pass
Uh-huh.
out the map. That's kind of the entry level job. But after they hired me, they realized that GS1s don't get paid enough money to work in the or actually you have to be a GS2 to work in the fee booth. So they weren't quite sure what to do. So they made me a full-time interpretive ranger and put me out in the park talking to people, answering questions, giving walks and talks until that lasted about 6 weeks. Uh, because the interpretive rangers who were supposed to be out giving the walks and talks then had to be in the fee booth, and they weren't particularly happy about that. So they promoted me to a GS2 halfway through
Whoa.
the summer. So yeah, I just wanted to let you know that I've been on a management fast track since my early days at the Park Service. I was promoted from GS1 to GS2 after only 6 weeks. So and then they immediately
Not to
put me in the
brag, but
right. No, no, but I'm proud of that. They put me in the fee booth then and didn't let me out for the rest of the summer. And
yeah, that was
yeah,
that was their intention. They're like, "We're promoting you to be in the fee booth so that the interpretive rangers can be back on the field."
right. So that was my first summer, and it was a great place. Petrified Forest was an awesome park, great staff. There's a lot of cool science going on in the park in those days, still is, but in those days there were paleontologists making new discoveries every day. There were archaeologists working in the park. It was a great place to work, and they worked around my college schedule. So I
Oh,
went
that's
down
cool.
to the University of Arizona, went to school, came back every summer for 4 summers, and that was kind of how I helped pay for college, and it was
That's
great. So,
amazing.
yeah, it was a great
Yeah, and
experience, and
what a
yeah.
great, like, just exposure to Arizona also. You're in the north and south of the state and getting that exposure, and that's really cool. You have worked at quite a few different National Park Service sites. So I would love to hear what sites, aside from Bryce Canyon, obviously, hold a special place in your heart. And it sounds like Petrified Forest does, but, just giving listeners one of my favorite things about these interviews and about the Park Service, honestly, is just the exposure you get to all these different places in our country. So yeah, I'd love to hear some of the places that also hold special places in your heart.
Oh, sure. Yeah, no, they all do, and you're right. Not to it's hard to sort of, lump people into big groups or stereotypes, but I tend to find in on this topic, you can put people into a couple different groups. I know some people who have worked in one park their entire career. That's what they love. That's what they do. And then there's other people like me who maybe are a little more common who we sort of enjoy the moving around and seeing new
Yeah.
places and new things.
Yeah.
And I'm certainly in that category, right? So I worked at Petrified Forest, and then my degree is in in anthropology, mostly southwestern archaeology, and so I always had this desire to work at places like Mesa Verde, so I went there for a while, and that
Cool.
truly has a place in my heart. I love Mesa Verde. My wife works at Mesa Verde now, so we are a dual career couple, and she works on projects at Mesa Verde, and I truly
Cool.
I love Mesa Verde. For this was my third Utah park, in addition to Timpanogos Cave. Early on, we worked at Natural Bridges National Monument, which is the first national park in Utah, by the way.
Yeah.
It was established in 1908. And Natural Bridges, there were only 6 of us who lived there at the time I was there. And we were 40 miles from our nearest neighbors in the middle of Cedar Mesa, what's now better known as, Bears Ears National Monument. It is an amazing place and will always, always be special. There, you're a true generalist ranger. You do a little of
Yeah.
everything, and it was an amazing place. We spent a few years in Alaska at Kenai Fjords National Park, and both our children were born when we were up in Alaska.
Oh, wow.
I will always love Kenai Fjords. It is an amazing landscape of ice and sea, and a great place to live. If I hadn't gotten the opportunity, which only comes along once in a career, to go to be a Bevinetto Fellow in Washington D.C. and go work in the on that with the House of Representatives, we wouldn't have left Alaska. That was a
Yeah.
tough move, but we love all of those. All of those places are near and dear to me. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think it was my family did an Alaska cruise when I was pretty young. But is it do you know if they typically go through Glacier Bay rather
A,
than Kenai Fjords?
a lot of the cruises go through Glacier Bay. That's pretty common, right? The big cruise ships don't usually go into Kenai Fjords. They would some cruise ships would embark or disembark in Seward, which is where we live. That's where the town where the
Oh,
headquarters
okay.
of the park is. And then we had smaller cruise boats, smaller day boats that would go out into the fjords. And we would put rangers on those boats and send them out to do day trips. But the large cruise ships don't come into the actual fjords themselves.
I
Yeah.
see. Yeah, I'm looking at a map right now, and I've talked to a decent amount of different Alaska National Park superintendents this far, but have not talked to any of the parks along the bay, or I guess the Gulf yet. That's cool. Going into Utah, because you said it's your third Utah park. My understanding, and I actually am, curious for the podcast, and then just I always am surprised by the new things I learn about the Park Service and new.
Mhm.
You're the second superintendent who's done the Beneviet. What is it? The Benevietto Fellowship.
Bevinetto, uh-huh.
Bevinetto
Bevinetto,
Fellowship.
uh-huh.
So I learned about that. But then my understanding is you are the NPS Utah State Coordinator.
Mhm.
So I'm curious what that is.
It's a fancy title for a pretty simple job. And I'm no longer the coordinator. I've handed that
Okay.
off to someone else. But for a number of years, at least in this region of the Park Service, I don't know how common this is in other regions, but at least in what we now have called the Intermountain region, they established in each state a position known as a state coordinator, typically located in or near where the state capital was. So,
Cool.
so in our case, Salt Lake City. And in the case of Utah, I know when the position was created at this point, probably, I'm guessing 30 years ago or so, give or take, it was the large parks in southern Utah, Zion, Bryce Canyon, Capitol Reef, Arches, who actually pooled some money to hire this position. And it was a dedicated full-time position, but it was duty stationed up in Salt Lake City because remember this was in the time before cell phones were
Mm,
a thing and email was just barely beginning, and so things were done a lot more by long distance phone call and letter, and it was helpful to have somebody, basically a liaison is what this position is, who would meet with state government agencies, maybe the Office of Tourism or the Office
that's
of the
cool.
Department of Natural Resources, on particular issues or topics. The parks found it helpful to have someone who could attend meetings in person and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
By the time by the time I got to Timpanogos Cave in 2010, 2011, the region had made the decision to no longer fund the position as a dedicated full-time position. Uh, Technology had sort of caught up with us. We weren't These parks aren't nearly as remote from other agencies as they used to be,
Yeah.
but we still wanted someone there who could represent, like I say, uh, I work on special projects, that sort of thing. So it became part of the job of the Timpanogos Cave superintendent to serve a collateral duty as the state coordinator.
Mm,
But so I'd spend a lot of time with the tourism office talking about their
that's cool.
Mighty Five campaign, for example, and what kind of impacts that created, and also how we might help with their messaging to maybe reduce visitor impacts. One of my predecessors in the role, back in 2002, worked a lot with the state on planning for the Olympic Games in Salt Lake City in
Oh,
2002, and like how the
that's so
parks
cool.
could be prepared for those. So
Yeah.
so the workload varied, but yeah, you're basically just sort of a point of contact liaison.
Well, the two things, my understanding is Utah's either going to or is in the running to host another Winter Olympics, which is very exciting. My parents have a house in Park City, so I spend a good amount of time in Utah. So
Mhm.
I'm excited for that.
You're right. It has been decided. Utah's hosting the Winter
Oh, it's
Games.
official. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
2034.
okay. Yeah. I know it's one of those things where you're like, "Oh my gosh, that's so far away." But I guess it'll be here before we know it. And then, alas. My understanding is that you also, whilst working at the Park Service, taught classes at the University of Utah. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Sure, that's another one that, yeah, it it's probably not as impressive as it sounds, but I like that I taught university classes.
No,
That's good.
I
Let's
think
stay
that's
with that.
awesome.
No, the University of Utah, it's a nationwide program. It's not just at Utah, but they have a branch of the Osher Institute, which is a program for community classes for adults. I think we have to be 50 and older to participate. So these are short classes. And they reached out to us. I think it was in 2016, probably during the centennial of the Park Service.
Yeah.
they found me because I was the state coordinator. It came with that title, and asked
Yeah.
if we could maybe put together some sort of a class. So we put together, I coordinated two classes. Well, I coordinated one and I sort of taught one. So these are short seminar type classes for
Okay.
mainly for adults in the community on park topics. The first one I invited various friends and colleagues to come each present sessions on various topics related to national parks. Once a week, we would talk about the history of the Park Service, or we would talk about current issues in
Yeah.
parks. And then I did a follow up class, I think the next semester or a semester after, just sort of an overview of Utah parks with one park each night. We sort of talked about their history and
Yeah.
their resources and way to plan a visit and that sort of thing. So these were adult education classes for the community. They were sponsored by the university, but they were fun.
Oh,
It
I
was
see.
fun to
I
it
see.
was fun to get together and do that. So, yeah,
Yeah,
but that's
and
what
get
that was.
more plugged into the university.
Right.
So that's very
Exactly.
cool. This is more of a personal interest question of just I am curious about building a camper van at some point in my life, and I saw in a press release that you either were converting or converted a camper van. So I'm curious about that.
I was impressed by your ability to dig out little nuggets of
Ah,
odd things in my life, right? But yeah, I have a van. We'll sell you for cheap if you're interested.
interesting.
Yeah,
Noted.
yeah, we can talk offline if you want.
Yeah.
But no, so this was, I don't like a lot of park rangers who like to move around, the whole idea of van life or that idea of converting an old school bus or, or having a dirt bag or climber van to travel around the country in, or, call it whatever you like. I think
Yeah.
I'm not the first or the last to sort of embrace that idea. But during COVID, when COVID hit, I have a teenage son. Well, he's not a teenager anymore. He's in his 20s now,
Wow,
but
crazy.
he was a high school senior. COVID hit, classes were all turned remote, and that was a tough time for lots of kids, including mine. Really hard to be cut off from your social circles and things like that. And
Right.
he likes to build things. We like to do things together. So we had been kidding around for a long time about wouldn't it be fun someday to convert a school bus or to build a van.
Right.
So we
Right.
found a so we said, well, let's just do it. Let's just
Wait.
try it. So
Yeah.
we found a cheap used sprinter van for sale by somebody up in Park City, and probably a skier snowboarder who used it to get around, and he had it for sale. So we bought it, parked it in our backyard, and he and I spent a lot of time over that year of his high school year when he wasn't doing classes. We were researching, designing, building. He did most of the carpentry and building the interior. I did the solar panels and the electrical
Uh-huh.
system and the plumbing and the propane system. And so we've got this van that's a little rough around the edges, but he takes it out camping. He likes to mountain bike and things. And so he likes to once in a while take it out. But it was a really fun project. But we'll never put it on Instagram. It will never be the van that you look at as a model
Yeah.
to design your own. But it was a great, great fun project to do. And
I
yeah,
mean, yeah,
yeah,
that's I'm intrigued also by the like project aspect of it and how there are resources. Like I don't know any electrician stuff, but you can figure it
that
not I don't want to say figure it out, but like there are YouTube resources to
right.
my understanding figure out some of those things. I don't know how the electrician stuff goes.
We are both students of YouTube University for sure, and we
Yeah.
like to figure it out as we went along. But it's kind of fun though too. I have a lot of seasonal employees here at Bryce Canyon who live in vans,
Uh-huh.
and it's a great solution for some people to the housing issue, and some
Yeah.
of them have built their own, and I admire theirs and say, wow, you did that so much better than I
Yeah.
did, and
Yeah.
it gives me a new perspective. It's not always as easy as it looks online. I just have to tell you,
I tend to overcommit to things and
but
think
well,
more
let's see.
highly of myself than actual. So I'm very aware that I think it would be very challenging, but I'm intrigued nonetheless.
Yeah.
Jumping into Bryce Canyon a little bit more, can you share? You shared about the experience watching the sunrise right when you started, but is there another kind of specific location in the park that holds a special meaning to you?
I thought about that a lot. I knew you were gonna ask me something along those lines about special locations. I have to tell you, the whole park's amazing. there's a spot that I like to go out walking in the evening. My wife and I go for walks that has just become kind of the special spot. It's between Fairyland Point and Sunrise Point. All of the big viewpoints in the park are connected by a trail along the rim of the park. And we
Oh,
like to
nice.
walk that section. It's beautiful, but more than that, it's there's there's hardly anyone out there. We often have it completely to ourselves. It has
Yeah.
amazing views. It's just kind of become our place.
Yeah.
I could name you a dozen other places that are super popular and beautiful. I love the Peekaboo Trail, and of course the Queens Garden Navajo Trail is classic, especially in a full moonlight. That's one of
Oh,
my memorable
wow.
things was when we get a full moon in Bryce and it's so bright on the hoodoos that you can hike a lot of these trails in the amphitheater with very little, if any, light. So we hiked the
Really?
whole Queens Garden Navajo without any headlamps or flashlights. That's amazing. But I have to say, I just like the quiet of the rim trail out on the
Yeah.
ends of the rim trail. It's really beautiful. Yeah.
That's really
Now I've
cool.
given away my secret spot, so everybody
I
will
know.
find me out there now
I
if
know.
they
I'll be
listen to
like, I
this.
know where to find Jim.
Yeah,
Um,
but that's okay.
yeah. The what ways you kind of mentioned that Bryce Canyon is wonderful across all seasons. You said it's mostly hiking in the summertime and cross country skiing in the winter. Are there other ways people typically recreate in the park?
It's got all the kind of classic recreation, and um, I'm working to expand the cross country skiing. We just need more snow. You can
Mm,
hike year round. We find a lot of people actually hike even in the winter. So hiking is year round. We recommend some sort of traction devices, cleats,
right.
like that you can put on the bottom of your boots because the trails get icy. But we see people hiking all year round. I
Oh, cool.
mentioned we have two campgrounds with a couple hundred campsites, and at least part of one stays open throughout the winter. So there's always camping is always an option, hiking is always an option. We have a paved bike trail. I mentioned it's 18 miles long. 5 miles are in the park, and then the rest is outside the park on the Dixie National Forest. It goes all the way down along Highway 12
Wow.
into a place called Red Canyon to our west. We're working this coming year, we're going to add 2.5 more miles to the bike trail. That will
Wow.
complete the planned trail. So it'll actually be a little over 20 miles long. And we now have a bike rental shop that we've recently opened in the
Really?
park. There's some outside in Bryce Canyon City. And there's one actually inside the park. So if you come without a bike, you can rent a bike, and that's a great thing to do. I mentioned horseback riding. But really, and then if you don't like to hike, that's fine. We have almost 20 miles of road with lots of different viewpoints. So
Yeah.
for many people, simply driving the scenic drive, getting out, doing the classic sort of get out, look over the viewpoint is
Yeah.
amazing too. So, but really, it's a hiking kind of park. 78
Yeah.
miles. We have a trail, the Under the Rim Trail, which is typically done as a 1 or 2 night backpacking trip. So you can go out overnight. We give permits out because we have designated campsites where there's water along that trail. But there's plenty of day hiking. You can hike here for days, and all the trails tend to be looped and they connect back to each other
Oh,
and back to the
that's
rim, which makes
nice.
it really easy to do all kinds of different variations
Right.
and come back to the trailhead. It's great.
The
Hiking's great.
For the backpacking trails, when you said there's water, is it like water tanks or like streams that you filter water?
Streams and springs. Yeah, we don't have water
Okay.
tanks. There's a few natural springs, and
Nice.
they're few and far between, and so campsites tend to be near those.
Yeah, that makes
And
sense.
yeah, and they're very small. Sometimes they feed a natural spring, and you need to boil or filter your water, but
Yeah.
that's the limiting factor there. Yeah, it's pretty
Yeah,
dry.
the when we were in Big Bend, the trail we did, the loop, I think was I can't remember if it was 2 nights or 3 nights, but there was no water, and so
Right.
our packs were heavy because
I
you're
see.
carrying water for that whole time. And then since then, I've only backpacked in places where there is water to filter. And I went with that same group to Hawaii Volcanoes National Park and got to spend like 8 days backpacking. And they had like rain catches that I don't remember filtering the water, but again, I was a student and their instructors, so they might have been filtering it for us. But it was really cool. And I saw the benefit of not having to carry your own water and how it opened up how much longer you could spend in the backcountry.
Right. Yeah, you can carry your own. A lot of people do carry their own here, or we'll try to, cache. We'll try to drop a water jug somewhere on a side trail and then pick it up. But there's water. Yeah, there's water here, but it's the desert for sure.
Yeah.
You're limited on water. Absolutely. Yeah.
Can you share a little bit more about the geological formation of the hoodoos and, as I mentioned, what Bryce Canyon is famous for?
Um, sure. Yeah, that's certainly what we're known for, this great concentration. So the hoodoos, if you haven't seen them yet, you've certainly seen pictures. They're these erosional features, basically along, you know, Bryce Canyon has so many of them, partly because of our elevation and where we're located. So we get a lot of snow in the winter, or traditionally we would. That's maybe changing a little bit as the climate
Mm,
changes with us. The patterns may change, but we still get a fair amount of water through the winter. That water soaks into the rock layers, gets into faults and cracks, and then we get an extended freeze thaw cycle. So it gets cold enough at
okay.
night for the water to freeze, but warm enough during the day for it to thaw. The water expands in the cracks when it freezes, of course, and breaks down the rocks, and it causes erosion, pops the rock layers apart. Little by little, this forms long, narrow sort of fins of rock. They start to break down into pieces, and you end up with these columns, basically, with harder cap rock at the top. The whole of Bryce Canyon's amphitheater is basically an ancient lake bed made up of multiple layers of rock that have washed into that lake as sediment over eons. So you
Yeah.
have siltier layers, you have more harder, more conglomeratic layers with more harder stones, you have some more limestone type layers. So certain layers are harder, certain are softer, and the harder ones that stay at the top form caps, and then the rocks below them erode. So you've basically got these spires and pinnacles that are consistently eroding. They're eroding all the time, every day. What's interesting to me is that as we talk about climate change, I
Mhm.
didn't really think about we think about climate change affecting vegetation and wildlife and that sort of
Yeah.
thing. It actually affects the hoodoos too, because as the precipitation amount changes and the temperatures shift, you won't get that same pattern of water freeze and thaw. So it may over the long term, it may actually change the rate at which
Oh,
hoodoos
interesting.
form and erode. But the reason they're here is the combination of the elevation and the location of Bryce Canyon and how we get the snow. But
Interesting. That's cool. And I want to jump back a little bit because you had said when we were talking about how people recreate in the park, you're working to expand cross country skiing. What does that look like? Like what are you
well, that's
doing to do that?
well, that's my hope, right? It's something we're working on. We'll see how successful we are. Check in with me again in a
Yeah.
year or so or two, and
Yeah.
I'll tell you how it went. The community right outside the park, right to our north, is Bryce Canyon City,
Okay.
home of Ruby's Inn, owned by the Siret family. They were original homesteaders in Bryce Canyon area before the park was ever created. They've been here longer than the Park Service, and so this hotel and business has been there for a really long time. That community has a set of groomed ski trails in the
Oh, cool.
forest outside the park. They groom they groom the Fairyland Road inside the park for us. That's the only place they groom in the park, with cross country ski tracks for both classic Nordic skiing and also skate skiing.
Uh-huh.
So, which is awesome. And when the snow is good, it's an amazing place to ski.
Yeah.
Up until now, though, we haven't had any mechanical grooming of our trails inside the park. So if you come into the park, you can ski, but you're basically creating your own tracks. You're breaking trail.
Right.
But this year, I used some donated funds, working with Ruby's Inn, from a donation, to acquire some ski grooming equipment of our own. That's smaller equipment that we can use to groom the bike trail that runs through the park.
Uh-huh.
So in the summer, it would be a bike trail, and in the winter, we would put a ski track on it. And they have a ski rental business outside the park. So the idea would be we would connect our ski trail to their ski trail system, which expands the whole system, gives
Wow, that's
people more
cool.
opportunity. Last winter, Maddie, we saw 50,000 visitors to the park in January.
Really?
10 years ago, that number would have been more like 10 to 20,000 visitors.
Wow.
So as we're getting busier, people are seeing opportunities to visit at different times of the year.
Yeah.
And so I'd really love to give them some more opportunities to do things compatible with winter use. So we're hoping that maybe we'll get more people out on skis. It's a great recreational activity. Maybe people will stay a night at Ruby's or one of the other local businesses and ski. I think it's excited. The local community is kind of excited about it. But we
Yeah.
just got the groomer and we haven't gotten any snow yet. Although as I'm talking to you, there's snow in the forecast tonight. So we may get
Really?
our first. Yeah, in
Already?
mid-October, we may get our first early snow. So this winter will be an interesting test. If we get enough snow, we're going to try to create some new groom ski trails. We'll see how it goes. So,
Oh.
yeah,
Hmm.
we'll see how it goes.
The how long of a drive is it from Salt Lake City?
4.5 hours.
Okay. I'm,
Yeah.
my mind's whirling. I'm like, can I make it down at some point in the winter to do uh a day? I was looking at Ruby's Inn and it looks like it's a Best Western. Did they like buy
It's just
the
yeah, I think
rights?
I'm not yeah, I'm not sure how their branding worked, what their relationship is, but it is a Best Western property. Yeah.
Oh,
And
cool.
there's certainly there's other hotels as well. The nearby town of Tropic has several. Ruby's
Yeah.
is the closest, but yeah, tourism is a huge part of the Garfield County,
Yeah, that's
the
cool.
Garfield County economy. So there's more, but Ruby's is the closest. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Kind of a question leading off of that is Bryce Canyon is a part of the Colorado Plateau, which includes other renowned parks like think Zion, Arches. How does Bryce Canyon collaborate with neighboring parks to address different regional issues?
Oh, it's a really good question. We work together more and more by necessity. We share staff, and especially Bryce and Zion. We actually have
Oh, really?
some jointly funded staff that we share. We meet with each other regularly. We just recently had a short meeting of all the superintendents in the state. We get together to compare notes and look for opportunities to help each other
Yeah.
because none of us have enough to do all the things we feel like we need to or
Yeah.
want to do by ourselves. But in particular, I think probably the biggest one for these southern Utah parks right now, the way we're collaborating currently, I think has a lot to do with visitor use management. Uh,
Yeah.
we've all got we've all got staff that are either fully or partly dedicated to this idea of visitor use management. Uh, they are we are comparing notes with each other about as visitation continues to increase in these places, how do we create solutions to provide enjoyment for the most people possible, and at the same time appropriately protect resources that we're mandated to protect.
Yeah.
So we're sharing notes. It's really, I think, a key piece too when we start talking about that. It's a tough topic for a lot of people, but there's no one solution that works for all of us.
Yeah.
Where there's no I think people immediately jump to things like reservations and ticketed entry and things like that.
Yeah.
That may be a solution that works in one place, but not in many others. So both Bryce and Zion have shuttle systems to help get people into the park, where they're hugely valuable, and we both rely on them a lot. Arches, Capitol Reef, Canyonlands do not. I'm not sure if it's a solution they would even need or want. So
Yeah.
so, we compare notes and techniques as well, data collection, best
Yeah.
practices for how to track use, how to monitor use. So, yeah, in fact, again, as I'm speaking to you right now, the park planner for Bryce is in Moab, and part of the purpose for being over there is meeting with her counterparts for Arches,
Oh, cool.
Canyonlands, Capitol
Cool.
Reef, and Zion. They're at a conference together, and they're meeting to share notes so we can work together and help each other with visitor use management issues. Yeah.
That's great. For specifically Bryce Canyon, what are some of the biggest challenges you feel the park faces?
I think, overall, and we all face this. We certainly do. Climate change is a it's a big challenge. It As it changes, especially patterns in precipitation have big impacts on us from the wells that we use to produce park water to the springs in the park that wildlife rely on, or campers, backpackers also that
Yeah.
might use it. Water use and the intensity of storms, heavy storms really do damage to things like our park trails. This whole park's basically created by and preserved for erosion, right?
Yeah.
And so when things erode, it's great when the hoodoos were formed that way, but when our trails suddenly wash down the hill and have to be rebuilt, that's a big issue. So
Yeah.
climate change is a real concern. Um, Capacity, staffing, housing are all related, right?
Yeah.
Our ability to recruit and hire staff, and that goes directly to our ability to for people to be able to find housing in the area, whether it's in the local communities or in the park. It's a huge challenge. We're being really aggressive in how we're working on it, but it's a big challenge. And frankly, budget.
Yeah.
Frankly, it is a struggle to fund all of the various programs and projects that we do, and that's we're not alone in that either. That's an ongoing challenge for us is adequate funding for a lot of what we do.
That seems to be a challenge across the Park Service of how do you get, and that's the part of the crazy and really important role that the friends groups play to kind of fill that budgeting gap. I'm actually going to the fall meeting with the National Park Friends Alliance, if you're familiar with that, in
Mhm.
Yosemite in I think like 2 weeks at this point. And I'm interviewing the Yosemite superintendent in person, which I'm excited for, and then also moderating a panel with a bunch of different CEOs from the different nonprofits, including like National Park Foundation and stuff like that. So I'm excited to be getting more plugged into that world also.
Well, now I'm sorry I didn't make that one work out. I'm not gonna be there, but
Oh,
a lot of
sad.
but a lot of my friends will be, but, yeah, just this morning, I was sitting down with our executive director, our CEO of our friends group, to talk about our funding requests for this annual year. That is a huge part of what helps
Yeah.
keep the park running. Both everything, the sales they make in the visitor center, but also their
Yeah.
efforts to, attract philanthropic donations on a larger scale. That's huge. So, glad you're gonna be part of that.
Yeah, I'm excited. And I'm not upset that it's in Yosemite. I'm like, oh no, what do I do on my off day? I guess I'll go on a 10-mile hike in the valley. Are there any new, kind of speaking of just like different funding things and what's on the horizon in terms of projects, are there any new initiatives or projects coming up that you're particularly excited about?
Oh, I already told you about extending the bike path.
Yeah.
I'm excited about that one, and we have a couple of smaller projects looking at some of our parking lots and some of our existing viewpoints and things to maybe modify them just a little bit and improve the traffic flow and add a few parking spaces, which are, they're smaller projects, but they'll make a difference, and
Yeah.
we're excited about that. But I have to say on the bigger scale, the place that I think we still have so much work we can do that I don't think we've done nearly enough work in the past, and that is working with our tribal partners to
Yeah.
involve them in telling their stories. And this is also a theme across a lot of parks, and it's an important priority for our current secretary and director. But beyond that, sort of beyond their interest, it's just something we need to do better at. We
Yeah.
just do. And so we have tried a few smaller things here as we've been able over the last couple of years. We have created some internships specifically for tribal youth to begin to get them involved into our workforce. We created last year for the centennial a brand new festival event of a cultural heritage event where we brought together storytellers and demonstrators and craftspeople representing both the tribal communities, but also the non-tribal pioneer communities that settled this area back in the late 1800s, and
Yeah.
brought them all together for several days of events and, like I say, storytelling and dancing and crafts demonstrations. And it was very popular, and we hope that becomes an ongoing thing in the
That's
future. But
awesome.
on the bigger scale, where we're really putting some effort into now is working with Zion National Park and Cedar Breaks National Monument, Pipe Springs National Monument. We're creating a shared dedicated tribal liaison position, a dedicated staff person who will do nothing but work on our relationships and initiatives and
Yeah.
efforts with the tribes, because we're all dedicated to working on this, but it takes a little extra capacity and
Yeah.
folks who can really focus on this. So I think that's a foundational piece that we're doing right now. We're using funding from the Infrastructure Reduction Act to jumpstart that, with the
Cool.
promise that we'll continue to find ways to fund that position. So we're in the hiring process right now for a tribal relations specialist. And that I think is all really good work as we work on co-stewardship and better ways to involve the tribes.
Yeah. When interviewed Lena Pace at Arches and Canyonlands, she we had to move our schedule around a little bit because she ended up going on, I think it was a rafting trip in Canyonlands with some of her tribal partners. And
Mhm.
she was sharing that experience and said it was really cool because it was some of the folks who were from different tribes who used to live within that like park area and had never been. And they were, they just got to spend that extended time with each other in the backcountry, which is something I'm very passionate about of the value of time in the backcountry and how that like almost speeds up relationships. And so, yeah, it's cool to hear the different ways the Utah parks and then just the parks in general are, you know, partnering with indigenous groups.
Yeah, long way to go. A lot of work to do.
Yeah.
We'll never be done, actually. It'll be ongoing, but it's
Yeah.
something I'm excited to do our part to do more and
Yeah.
sooner.
One,
Yeah,
that's the thing about relationships is there's not like a just relationships in general. If you're married, you're always
right.
communicating with them. Like it's an ongoing relationship. And so, yeah, I like what you said that kind of the work will always continue to create better partnerships. Can you share a little bit more about my understanding is bristlecone pines are some of the oldest living trees in the world. Can you share a little bit more about their significance for Bryce Canyon?
Sure, I have to admit, I'm not sure if I'm well enough first to talk about their ecological significance, but I'll tell you, you find them in various spots throughout the park. They're not the bristlecones here are not quite as big and dramatic, picturesque as some of the ones you see in, say, up in Wheeler Peak and Great Basin or over in the
Yeah.
White Mountains. Um, but our trees, these are bristlecones. They've lived for hundreds of years here,
Yeah.
if not more than 1,000 years. And I just think to me, I just whenever I'm amongst them and I see them, the average visitor, unless they know what they're looking for or ask a question, haven't pointed out to them, probably don't know that they're walking through trees hundreds of years old, unless they've read one of our, you know, exhibits or
Yeah.
something. But they give you quite a bit of perspective, right? Time scales at Bryce Canyon are a great thing to think about. There's the
Yeah.
geologic time scale, the biologic time scale, the human time scale. So these trees have been here living, growing, thriving in this place for hundreds, if not thousands of years.
Yeah.
We've been here for a fraction of that time. So they give us they humble us a little bit, give us a little gratitude, give us a little perspective. That's what I think.
Yeah. That's cool. Uh is it John Muir National Monument in California? I'm blanking on the name. My friend and I Muir Woods
Muir
National
Woods.
Monument. We kind of stumbled across it. We were on a hike and came in the back way somehow into Muir Woods National Monument. We were like, what the heck? And those trees are also hundreds, if not thousands. They're definitely 1,000,
Right.
2,000, almost
It's
3,000
an
years
amazing
old.
place, Muir Woods. Yeah.
Yeah, I like regret not, because we were just chatting and catching up and we didn't spend a huge amount of time just sitting in that. Because to be in a forest like that, where the trees are generations and generations and generations and centuries old, is just really awe inspiring. And so I am yearning to go back and kind of be a little bit more pensive and thoughtful in my time there. And I like what you said of just appreciating the different time scales of and that's true for a lot of the parks, but
Mhm.
I'm thinking, like, specifically in Utah, it's more evident with, like, geological things, and I'm thinking, like, the Grand Canyon, stuff like that. So that's
Okay.
cool. As we wrap things up, I have a silly question and then kind of a final question, but it sounds like from a young age, you've enjoyed camping and hiking and all of that. Do you have a
Mhm.
favorite snack you like to bring?
You will always find in my pack, because I grew up hiking in the deserts of Arizona, you will always find, as long as I can get a hold of them, old-fashioned sanded lemon drops. Those are the thing.
Oh,
Yeah, those are what I grew up hiking on because they keep your mouth moist and they keep it going, and so you'll always find a bag of lemon drops in my pack, especially for hiking in the desert. There
yeah,
you go.
that's a good tip to keep, your mouth
Mhm.
not getting from super dry. And then what is there's two pieces to this question. You can answer them separately or together. But what's something you wish everyone knew about Bryce Canyon National Park, regardless if they've been or not? And then what's a common misconception you feel about the park that you'd like to debunk?
Sure. Um, the common misconception one is relatively easy. We talk so much about parks being crowded and loved to death and overcrowded, but I have never found a day that I couldn't find easily, quickly. Not because I am the superintendent and I know the park, it was easy to find a spot to get away from the crowds and be in a
Yeah,
beautiful spot by myself. It's a myth to think that they don't exist. You just have to take a couple extra minutes to get away from the busiest of the viewpoints. And
yeah,
and I think people get scared away by the crowd. So that's the myth. Um, the things I wish people knew, I'm gonna take superintendent's prerogative here and say I really have two. The first one is that we not just Bryce Canyon, although Bryce Canyon certainly does, but all parks have great employees. National Park Service people are some of the best people
yeah,
you'll want to meet. They have so much talent and ability and could do so many things, and they've chosen this work. And the whole title of your podcast about who runs this park. I don't really run the park. The people who run the park are the people who work in the entrance stations and clean the bathrooms and give the ranger talks and work at the visitor center desk. And
Yeah.
they're not they're not often as appreciated these days as I wish they were. And I would love it if people would take a minute to get to know them, say hi, and just and thank them if you think they deserve it. But the people in the parks are good people. This is what we do. The second thing I wish everyone would know. I like to go out after work sometimes and walk along the rim between Sunrise and Sunset Point, which is the busy part of the park. It's where a lot of
Yeah.
people are out in the evening. And what I see are hundreds of people on a summer night watching the sunset, talking to each other. They've got snacks out on the benches. They're sharing food. They're taking each other's pictures. They're asking each other where they're from. Where did they go today? Where did they hike? What did they
Yeah.
see? We have about 40% or more of our visitation is international visitors. They come from all
Uh-huh.
over the world. So
Wow.
you'll hear every different language in the world as you walk that little stretch of the park rim. And what I want people to know is this, I think, beyond the geology and beyond the trees and things, as Wallace Stegner said, national parks are America's best idea.
Yeah.
We often forget the second part of that phrase, his phrase, which was, "It's America at its most democratic."
Yeah.
These shared places. If you come to a place like Bryce, especially Bryce, people are people. There are no labels and there are no divisions. And I think in a world we're in right now, where people too often are about me instead of we and I instead
Yeah.
of us, I think this is the role national parks can play that's beyond whatever hoodoos or mountains or canyons or whatever that we play. So when you come to a place like Bryce and take a minute to appreciate, these are people, happy people, people enjoying each other, people who have forgotten about who we're supposed to not like today because they have a different
Yeah.
political view or they belong to a different group than me.
Yeah.
And so Bryce is really special that way. With my peers, I often tease when I introduce myself that I'm Jim Ireland, the superintendent of America's favorite national park.
Ah.
And all my peers sort of jeer and grunt when I say that. But Bryce is truly one of these special places where people come together, they're really happy, and they really enjoy each other, and
Yeah.
it's what national parks should be,
Yeah,
and what
that's
really we
beautiful.
should strive for in our society at large, and I'm glad to be part of that. That's what I'd like them to know.
I love that. And I mean, why I'm drawn to backpacking trips is yes, the isolation in nature, but it's also building those deeper relationships with people that I'm with. And I love that social aspect of different national parks and that, I hope to experience that at Bryce Canyon one day. So
Awesome.
maybe see you this winter for the cross country.
Yeah, 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 let me know.
I will for sure.
We would love to see
Yeah.
you. That'd be
Yeah.
great.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Natty. Thanks for putting this whole podcast together and giving us an opportunity to talk a little bit more about behind the scenes stuff in parks. It's
Yeah,
awesome.
of course. Thanks so much for listening today. Our music was composed by Danielle Bees. If you liked this podcast, rate, review, download, and tell your friends about it. Listen to the other episodes wherever you listen to your podcasts or visit us at whorunthispark.com to learn more. I'm Maddie Pellman, and you've been listening to Who Runs This Park.